How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Wednesday, May 15th, and I got another round of stories on today's episode to discuss with you guys, starting with the NFL's monumental new contract with Netflix on the broadcasting live games on the Christmas Day games this season. More details on that in just a few seconds. Later on, we'll talk about Micah Parsons making history off of the football field and how that could end up affecting his playing career and just this season overall. Plus, a recent report coming from sources around the NFL describes the Chicago Bears locker room, their quarterback room back in 2021 as toxic. So I'll give more details on that and how that all sort of broke down back then and what that has to say now about Justin Fields, who is in that quarterback room, as well as the Chicago Bears. So stick around, a lot more to talk about on today's episode. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start on the first topic, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you want to make during today's show, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your question pop up in my chat box, and that way I can read your question on air and just get your guys' perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics we talk about on today's show. It's a massive help for this show as well, on top of all the other shows across the network. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link with any of your questions or comments, gsmcpodcast.net. But with that, I will start and dive into probably some of the biggest news, I guess, just recently in the NFL, other than the entire schedule release that is set to be unveiled later today at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. This was pretty monumental, I thought, that the NFL and Netflix would announce this exclusive broadcasting TV deal that would give Netflix the exclusive rights to both of the Christmas Day games this year for the NFL. It's the first time any professional sports league will partner with Netflix and give them the rights to stream their games on their platform. So pretty massive in that field, the NFL being the first one to venture into this avenue with Netflix. And it is a gamble, it is history being made, but it's also not too wild to think about with just the recent success that Netflix has had. You talk about the Tom Brady roast, introducing a little bit of the NFL through that, the quarterback series that they've had in the past, also announcing the wide receiver series to follow that sort of mold that the quarterback series had last year. Now they're going to do the same thing with the wide receivers this summer. Plus, you have them also announcing that partnership with the WWE and having Monday Night Raw come over to Netflix as well. That's not until 2025, but just continuing on with this trend. Also, the Mike Tyson and Jake Paul fight will be streamed live on Netflix, so it is groundbreaking, but it's also not a massive surprise because of how much steam Netflix has really been picking up over the last few months, year or so. With this new announcement, they also unveiled a 3-season deal, a 3-year deal basically with Netflix to give Netflix the exclusive rights to broadcast these NFL games at least once, one of the games on Christmas going forward. So this year it'll be both of them, just because of how the deal worked out. But in 2025 and in 2026, it would be at least one game. So depending on which days it falls, depending on who else bids for those Christmas Day games, Netflix is guaranteed at least one in the next 2 years. So that's a positive as well for Netflix, not just to get it this year, but also build on this in the years to come. The NFL's Executive Vice President of Media Distributions, Hans Schroeder, commented on this massive deal by saying, "We couldn't be more excited to be the first professional sports league to partner with Netflix to bring these live games to fans all around the world." And with the games being announced, or going to officially be announced later today, it was sort of leaked. Well, not leaked. It was announced by pretty reliable sources, Adam Schefter, and others around the NFL announced that it was going to be the Kansas City Chiefs traveling to Pittsburgh as one of the games, as well as the Baltimore Ravens traveling to Houston to take on the Texans for the doubleheader in 2024 on Christmas Day. So we know what games are going to be played there. It's going to be on Netflix. Now, when the entire schedule is announced, we're going to get a confirmation, but we already got the sort of heads up from Adam Schefter and all these other sources. So that is pretty much guaranteed to be the two games. And what better way to debut the NFL on Netflix than obviously having the Kansas City Chiefs on there. I think that was a given, being that this was going to be the first time to do it. You're obviously going to have probably the face of the league in Patrick Mahomes there, and as well Baltimore, Houston, two young superstar quarterbacks, two great teams as well in the AFC. Really no-brainers there for the games that they selected, and also continuing on with the trend of now looking bigger picture a little bit here with the NFL now giving games to Netflix, already having games on Peacock and stuff like that. The NFL Christmas games are the second NFL package to go to a streaming site exclusively. So the first being Thursday Night Football. All the Thursday Night Football games are on Amazon Prime. Now the Christmas Day games will be exclusively, at least one of them, will be on Netflix. So that's also another monumental sort of trend, revelation that is going on now with the NFL. And this is just happening or just following last year's success. A lot of positives came from the triple header that the NFL had on Christmas Day last year through their, really, it was just held through their traditional networks, on CBS and Peacock and Fox and whatnot. But the just strong feedback and the massive positive ratings that the NFL got from this, there was no way that once you saw that revenue come in, you saw how well it was received by the general public, that the NFL was going to hold back by any means. There was no way that was going to happen, and because of that, you see them now partnering with Netflix, how popular they are, and just really meeting at a point where both the NFL announcing the Christmas Day games and Netflix are both at a very high point in popularity. To make this partnership happen, I think it's going to do wonders for both of them. And now, how it falls, looking into the more specific details and just planning for future games on Christmas Day with Netflix. I mentioned that they're going to at least have one of the games on Christmas. I'm assuming the NFL will plan to have double headers at least, or triple headers like they did last year. But depending on how they fall, it'll all, and I'm sure how it is received on Netflix and how people react to the broadcast and how much people like it on Netflix, will all play into this whole equation of going forward and planning what games will be on Netflix and how it all works out. Next year in 2025, the Christmas Day games will fall on a Thursday, so with Netflix already being guaranteed one of them, I would have to assume that, and again, this just plays into the great planning, the genius sort of maneuvering by the NFL. Next year, Christmas Day will be on a Thursday, so you already have Netflix having guaranteed a game in their contract, and if you want, you have on Thursday how it all falls with Amazon Prime and them having the exclusive rights to Thursday Night Football. You can sort of now have Amazon Prime up their bid a little bit, maybe pay a little bit more to the NFL to try and get one of those games pried away from Netflix, because if not, Netflix is just going to get that exposure. All the eyes will be on Netflix for that doubleheader. So in a way, the NFL has planned this out perfectly, no surprise there, to have Amazon Prime be in a spot where they might want to pay a little bit extra to make sure they get one of those games. Depending on how it is all worked out in their contracts, I'm sure that is something that they will discuss next year. And also looking even further than that into 2026, Christmas Day will fall on a Friday, so now you look at how and who will get that game. Netflix is guaranteed one of them, of course, but also this year, the Friday game has been given to Peacock when the Packers play the Eagles in Brazil. So will Peacock also in 2026 want to up their bid a little bit to get one of those games away from Netflix and give a little bit more to the NFL to make sure they get one of those games on Christmas to draw more attention into their streaming platform? All of that comes with this deal, how massive it is, how much revenue it will generate for the NFL, for Netflix, and all of these other streaming platforms as well. It is how this trend is going now. A lot is being put into these streaming platforms, and it is starting to become the new wave of it all. And with the NFL sort of taking over Christmas Day, I'm interested to see how the NBA reacts to this. Do they maybe partner with Netflix also and have some of their games on there, or do they do something different this Christmas to try and lure some fans back into their side of the sports world? That all will be played out in the next few months and how they react to it. But also, I just want to know what you guys think of just this whole deal that was announced. Do you like the games being on Netflix? Do you think this is too much, that the NFL is swaying too far into just streaming? Leave your guys' thoughts in the comments or on the live episode chat box on anything that you're feeling around this deal. I personally like it. I think the more the NFL embraces these changes, sticks with the trends, and sticks with what's just working, quite frankly, I think it'll only just make for more better content. It'll improve their revenue and all their viewership and stuff like that. So I like it. I think it'll be interesting to see it on Netflix and how it'll all play out. How will it look? Who will be broadcasting and stuff like that. I'm a fan of it right now. That could change. Maybe it stinks in December and how it is all shown compared to CBS or Fox or NBC. But for right now, I'm a big fan of it. Leave your guys' thoughts in the chat box or in the comment section after the episode. But that's all I have on the Netflix and NFL partnership on the moment right now. So we'll continue on with the show. Moving on with more topics we have on today's agenda. I mentioned Micah Parsons making history off of the football field. I will disclose those details in just a few seconds, as well as talking about the Chicago Bears quarterback room in 2021 and how bad and toxic, as the reports say in their recent news source about the quarterback room. Plus, we'll talk about the New York Jets and their offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, and how it might not be all sunshine and roses from their relationship as well. All that is coming up on today's show, so make sure to stick around. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to jump into our second segment on today's show, talking about Micah Parsons. And no, we're not talking about the Dallas Cowboys this time, oddly enough, but more so about Bleacher Report, another streaming media company off of the last segment that we talked about with Netflix and the NFL. Now we're shifting our attention over to Bleacher Report, announcing yesterday that Micah Parsons and themselves reached a multi-year extension, and on top of that, they named Micah Parsons as the president of the Bleacher Report Gridiron. This officially makes Micah Parsons the first active professional athlete to hold a leadership title at a sports media company. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, you see other active players in the media world already, from Draymond Green with the NBA. You have Mookie Betts as well, Trae Young, also as well, having all of them having their own podcast. It seems like everybody has their own podcast, even in the NFL as well. Max Crosby has a show, another podcast as well. So you might be a little bit confused as to why this is any different, why this is historical. Well, reacting to those players having their podcast, and now Micah Parsons agreeing to this extension, his new title comes with a bit more responsibility. He does have that title of president of the Bleacher Report Gridiron. So with that, his own podcast that he has on Bleacher Report, called The Edge. He'll also continue to work on that as well, starting back up in August. But he'll also work with Bleacher Report Gridiron with their team to come up with new, in their words, with new content and design merchandise for the 2.5 million followers that they have, according to the sources around the situation and how the whole detail has worked itself, or how the whole deal has worked itself out. With that, it isn't something that's too foreign, I guess, for athletes now to dive more into the media world. I mentioned before on Bleacher Report specifically, Mookie Betts has a podcast around baseball and just his experience reacting to things around the league. You also have Trey Young as well, having also another popular podcast where he talks to basketball players and just everything basketball really as well. So you have baseball, football, and basketball on Bleacher Report already. But Micah Parsons, his show has drawn the most attention. It seems like he was also a co-host on the Bleacher Report Gridiron Draft Night Special alongside with CJ Stroud, and with that there was a 27% increase in the viewership as well with that whole Draft Night Special. That was the highest boost percentage of any live stream on the Bleacher Report app. So it seems like Micah Parsons has drawn the biggest crowd so far with not only his podcast but just appearing on these Draft Night Specials and really just appearing a lot in the media, quite frankly, on things that he says on his podcast. It's all not controversial, but it just draws a lot of people in with things that he has to say and just how he reacts to things like that. He is very popular in the media world, and he's also still obviously a football player. It is unknown right now if Micah Parsons has any ownership stake in this new extension that he has. I'm going to assume that he doesn't, because I feel like if he did, that would be something mentioned in all these various articles that you see out on the topic. So I'm just going to assume that he does not have any ownership stake in this new deal. But other than that, I could be wrong, with further details coming later on. But from what I saw right now at the time of doing this show, I didn't see that he did have any ownership stake. And also, on this topic of Micah Parsons getting extensions, a little bit of a side note, but he also signed a multi-year extension with Adidas. So Micah Parsons, is safe to say, he is winning off of the football field. He is winning in the offseason, and it is odd to say because he is, like I mentioned before, a football player before anything else. He is only still 24 years old, and he is already a pretty prominent figure in the media world, much more than maybe the traditional Cowboys fan would like to see Micah Parsons comment on every single topic, it seems, in just media, doing other people's jobs while he's still playing football. That might rub people the wrong way, as I've seen on various shows on ESPN or any other morning shows that you see. Some people just don't like the fact that Micah Parsons is so active, has his own podcast, and talking so freely about things that go on in the NFL and really just about other players and other situations across the league as well. I don't see a problem with it before, when he just had the podcast and he was saying whatever he wanted to. I didn't have a problem with that, but now I am starting to skew a little bit to the more precarious side because he does have that leadership title. There does come a lot more responsibility, and how it all ties back into football, what he does in his free time, he might have endless free time to still focus on football and do everything like this. Not to my knowledge, he doesn't have kids or anything like that other to focus on off the field on top of this new deal. So he could just have a bunch of free time, but on top of having the leadership deal, having all of this just attention on the Cowboys, and really going back to what Jerry Jones said, being all in on this season, could this be seen as a distraction? Um, there does come a point where I am totally on the side of how Micah Parsons put it. When he reacted to this extension, really the biggest point he made was to get athletes more prepared for their post-playing career. That's why he agreed to this extension with Bleacher Report. He already had the podcast, but assuring that long-term contract, that long-term assurance is something that he found very important, and that is also something else you see athletes talk about. If you don't have a plan for after playing, it could get pretty depressing, I guess is the word for a lack of a better term, for these athletes that just don't find the motivation, the routine that they usually have when they are playing. Now they're retired or they're forced to stop playing, and they really don't know where to look, don't know what to do with all this free time now. That was the biggest point Michael Parsons was trying to make, trying to validate this extension and trying to get this leadership position with Bleacher Report to have that assurance after he is done playing football. But the questions now come up about, is it too early? I mentioned he is only 24 years old. Especially playing with the Cowboys, you already have a lot of media attention on top of you as it is as a player, not being in the media. With Micah already having a podcast, that was, I would say, pretty much doubled. And now getting further into the media world and having other responsibilities on top of your podcast and being this sort of leader in a sports media company, is that going to be seen as more of a distraction, especially this year? Not to mention with the Cowboys, there's always pressure on the Cowboys, but with the contract extension of Dak, where does CeeDee Lamb fall in that? His own contract extension as well. I'm sure multiple times throughout this offseason and into the season, people are going to ask him about that sort of dynamic that he is trying to balance with Bleacher Report and playing for the Dallas Cowboys. With this year, we're being so many unknown factors with the contracts, with the contract of Mike McCarthy, how this team looks a year or two from now. Pile that on top of Michael Parsons venturing off in the offseason, trying to overplan maybe for his future. That is something that I have questions about, but if he can manage it all well, like I mentioned before, from my knowledge, he doesn't have other responsibilities on top of this leadership position and football, so he could just be managing all fine. And it is weird a little bit now to see more players further themselves in the sports media world. Before, you had mainly, I'm thinking of Draymond Green appearing on shows, just as a co-host, just as a reference there to talk about the NBA or the NFL if you're an NFL player, and get just your point of view from actually playing in today's game. It's now weird, a little bit unorthodox, to see people further themselves in the media company, and it is just part of this development, this evolution of more and more players feeling that empowerment. You already sort of had it with the NBA and the way that they were going with how they controlled trades and looked for their best interest in, like I mentioned, trades and free agency and all of that. But also in the NFL, you didn't really have it too much. Now I think players are starting to embrace that empowerment more and more, with kids also coming out of college, having the NIL deals, and them having that more responsibility on themselves to look out for themselves, not just on the football field, not just on their athletic careers, but also past that, looking forward to that, business ventures and things like that. It is just all part of the evolution, and now we're seeing it grow even more. And on that topic, just to look even further, kind of into the next wave of athletes who can sort of push this limit a bit more. The names that came to my mind right away, no real surprise, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter already has his podcast on Bleacher Report, already has a show with Bleacher Report, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him venturing further off as well, similar to Micah Parsons in this department. Once he gets into the NFL, once he has all these other opportunities available to him, Shedeur Sanders as well, the marketing you can get from him, who he is, who his dad is, I think that's a no-brainer that companies and other sponsors will try and get their hands on. And also, looking in the basketball world, also just coming to my mind right here is Tyrese Halliburton. I think he's one that's very engaged in the social media, just media in general world, and also Jalen Williams of the Oklahoma City Thunder are two more that I think would not only be entertaining to watch, but also I think just fit the mold of young players in the respected sport that they play, venturing more off in the sports media world. I can see them as likely candidates, but for right now, it's Micah Parsons pushing that envelope and growing the presence of these current athletes in the sports media world. I like it. I just want to see how it all plays out, and does it affect his playing career? Does it affect his performance on the field? That is left to be determined, but for right now, we'll move on with the show. A few more topics to talk about on today's episode. I mentioned the reference back to 2021, that Chicago Bears quarterback room, including Andy Dalton, Justin Fields, and Nick Foles, described as toxic. I'll give you the reasons why that is and who is more to blame in that situation. Plus, are the New York Jets trying to replace Nathaniel Hackett? Is he on the hot seat in 2024? I'll give you guys my perspective on that. So stick around. Those two topics and more are coming up on today's episode. We'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Keeping it rolling here on today's show of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast into a new topic about the Chicago Bears. You know, everything being mentioned right now, I've already talked about the Bears a few times already this week, but it's all great news. Everything is positive around the organization. New quarterback, new GM, the head coach, all the new pieces that they have on offense. It's all great right now. I described it as the honeymoon phase for this new wave of players coming in, but it wasn't all like this. It was very much the opposite of what it is right now in terms of the talent and the leadership that was in that building a few years ago. Honestly, one of the darkest times, worst times for the Chicago Bears in recent memory was in 2021, specifically talking about the quarterback situation between Andy Dalton, Nick Foles, and Justin Fields at the time there in 2021 for the Chicago Bears. NFL writer Ty Dunn came out with new information around that time, around 2021, and the dynamic that all three of these guys had with each other back then, and how that all played into the situation that was surrounding the Chicago Bears in the organization and how just people talked about them around the NFL. According to Ty Dunn, both Andy Dalton and Nick Foles were willing to mentor Justin Fields when he was drafted, but Justin Fields allegedly wasn't interested. The quarterback room was described as toxic as hell by the various sources that Ty Dunn had available to him, and there were several arguments between the three of them, and it got to a point where the three of them were hardly ever seen together all at the same time. It was always, it seemed, Andy Dalton and Nick Foles having a conversation or just interacting with one another, and Justin Fields always about 15 yards behind, as described by one of the sources around this whole situation, and also recalling a specific moment between Nick Foles and Justin Fields. One of the sources of Ty Dunn mentioned a moment where Nick Foles was trying to teach Justin Fields something, trying to be that teacher to him, whether it be a specific play or just anything around becoming a professional. In this alleged report in the quarterback room where these two had that interaction. Foles was explaining something to Justin Fields, and once Nick Foles turned his head to face Justin Fields, Justin Fields just wasn't paying attention. He had his head down, and that irritated Nick Foles. He didn't like the way that was being he was being received by Justin Fields, just careless. And from that point on, the relationship got pretty icy from that moment on. And just to give a little bit of context, not to sort of pile this onto Justin Fields, because I think this recent report kind of makes Justin Fields look a little bit worse in a locker room amongst his teammates and whatnot, amongst his elders, more so than not. Just to give some context to this whole situation, if people weren't aware what was going on with the Chicago Bears in 2021, they were coming off of a season where they had just released Mitchell Trubisky ahead of the 2021 season, so they signed Andy Dalton, and Nick Foles was already on the team, but he wasn't coming off of one of his best years in 2020, had only 1,800 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions in only 9 games. So, those numbers might seem a bit pedestrian in a 17-16 game season, but he only played 9 games, and those numbers are far away from what you'd expect out of a starting quarterback. And also, you bring in Justin Fields, he is drafted, so you have those 3 guys sort of being there around the same time, or Andy Dalton and Justin Fields arriving at the same time. And after the offseason training camp and all that sort of stuff, Andy Dalton is named the starter, but with how the season went, with all the pieces around them, or I should say lack of support and pieces around the quarterback and just that whole situation, Fields ultimately took over, and as the season went out, all 3 of them actually played for the Chicago Bears. All of them started or just came in, replaced one or the other. It was much less than stable, just to say the least, with the quarterbacks, and also a lot of heat fell on Matt Nagy and the old general manager Ryan Pace, and how everything was sort of controlled from their point of view. After the 2021 season, you had Andy Dalton sign with the New Orleans Saints. Nick Foles was cut, and Matt Nagy and, like I mentioned, Ryan Pace, their old general manager, were both fired, and that's when you brought in Matt Eberflus and the new general manager, Ryan Poles. And as a disclaimer, now I think Ryan Poles, I said it before, I'm a big fan of what he's done. I think that was a right move to make, but this is where it all sort of comes together, where it all kind of falls out of favor for Justin Fields, and how he didn't really get a chance to really prove what kind of teammate, what kind of leader he could be. In 2021, he was just sort of trying to get accumulated, I assume, to what it is like to be a professional quarterback. You have these 2 guys, Nick Foles and Andy Dalton, in there. How he is received and how he received the information from them, I can't speak on, really. Just going off of what the sources say, it's not a very good reception. Not to alleviate Justin Fields from any blame here, but I would have to imagine coming in as a young player in a situation for the Chicago Bears, bringing in a new head coach, bringing in a new general manager, getting rid of those 2 guys that you were in the quarterback room initially, I couldn't just imagine how tough, how much of a whirlwind it was for Justin Fields to try and find any sort of solid ground to stand on and sort of really express himself as the sort of player that he truly is. Now, could he be this sort of player? I don't know personally, but just from everything that is provided in this article and just the information by Ty Dunn and his sources, it seems like the Chicago Bears at that point, really the biggest point for me was that it just lacked leadership. When Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles both came in, I think at that point it was a foregone conclusion that they wanted to flush everything that they didn't bring into the organization out of it, so that it would include all the wide receivers and all the schemes and everything basically that Justin Fields had learned and tried to absorb as much as possible in a short amount of time. That is all being washed out with Ryan Poles coming in and Matt Eberflus. They had this plan, 3 to 2-year plan to now in 2024 get the quarterback they want, get the receivers they want, the offensive coordinator, really have the vision that they wanted to back then in 2021 sort of now play out. And unfortunately for Justin Fields, I think he was just caught in a time where with new management coming in, everything was just being flushed out, and he really couldn't prove himself well enough with the pieces that he had around him, with everybody being shipped out, new players coming in, them trying to piece together this offense just to get through the regular season and into the draft and build this bigger project in the mind of Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus. I think it wasn't a great situation for Justin Fields to begin with, and now I'm not saying that he is innocent. There are a lot of reports about his attitude and just really his ability as a quarterback. But also, I think it's not fair to just put it all on him. As much as the quarterback affects winning and affects gameplay, I think having that leadership, that lack of leadership in Chicago at that time, I think speaks louder to me. And I would put more of the blame really on the management and the leadership, lack of leadership for the Chicago Bears in recent history, with Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace really at the helm of it. Usually you look at those leaders, if you have established good character guys in your locker room to solve this toxic environment, address it behind closed doors, and then you move on as professionals. That doesn't seem to be the case here, and to look at Justin Fields and expect him to hold that mantle right away, I think is a bit unrealistic. Even if he is a first-round pick, if the Bears traded up to draft him, with what's put around him, to expect him to be a leader through that whole whirlwind that he has to deal with. Plus, you have older guys in the building at the time that he was drafted. Nick Foles, who won a Super Bowl or has won a Super Bowl in his career. Andy Dalton, who was a very successful quarterback. It's hard to just throw yourself in there and proclaim yourself as the leader and take the reins of it all and get everything calmed down. I think there was a lack of leadership there that didn't allow it, and also it just seems like nobody was willing to take that step in the right direction and say, look guys, we just have to figure this out. If you guys aren't on the same page, you have to talk it out and resolve it. It doesn't do anybody any good when you guys are just not talking to each other, having just weird interactions in the locker room. It was never going to be successful, and from the information provided, I don't see anybody that did take the step in the right direction to sort of correct that. Justin Fields had certainly a part to play in it, but I don't think it is everything placed on Justin Fields. Mostly to me, it seems like the Chicago Bears just lack that leadership. And now, fortunately for them, they have it in a good general manager, a good head coach, it seems, and the generational type of quarterback that has just embraced it. But now Justin Fields also gets a chance to restart with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we'll see where this all goes. Maybe he has success, maybe the same problems follow him, but right now, how it is playing out, it is just best to move on from that situation, as well as moving on with the rest of the show. A few more topics to talk about on today's episode. Is Nathaniel Hackett on the hot seat? How the New York Jets have tried allegedly to replace him as the offensive coordinator. More details on that in just a few seconds. And also, Kirk Cousins finally speaks on the Atlanta Falcons drafting Michael Penix. What did he have to say, and what are my reactions to his comments on a recent podcast? Stick around to find out that information. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Moving right along with the show, and another new topic to discuss. Before that, on Nathaniel Hackett. And before I talk about the New York Jets situation, I want to bring up one last time on today's show. If you have any questions or comments you want to make, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your question pop up right away. I can read it on air, and that way get your guys' perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics on hand. It's a massive help for this show as well as all the other shows across the network. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. With that, back to the New York Jets. A pretty successful offseason this year. Last year, it was, I guess it would be a success because they brought in Aaron Rodgers, but with that in mind, the regular season didn't pan out as they would have hoped, and now this offseason you have Aaron Rodgers recovering from his Achilles tear, and you have more pieces being brought in to support him. On top of that now, this topic of Nathaniel Hackett keeps being brought up, more recently with SNY's Connor Hughes reporting on it and exploring this avenue of the New York Jets trying to replace him. To give a little bit of context, when Nathaniel Hackett first came in, he was coming off of the bat of that very disastrous Denver period as the head coach. Nothing really positive came off of that. You had those comments made by Sean Payton. While I don't really agree with how he said it on air, I don't think he was too far off from the truth on how just poor it was from a head coaching level in the NFL. And coming off of that stint, you would have thought that it would be a while before he got in any sort of job in the NFL. But right away, the New York Jets hired him as their offensive coordinator. And like many people would imagine, the whole narrative around that was that they're just trying to bring in Aaron Rodgers to get him to sign with the New York Jets. You have one of his favorite offensive coordinators come in. It undoubtedly would also lure Aaron Rodgers in to be in a spot with a familiar face in there as the offensive coordinator. That was all being said about that, but now as the seasons have played out, there have been reports about Robert Saleh trying to maybe explore a way to get these play calling responsibilities away from Nathaniel Hackett. SNY's Connor Hughes said on the topic that the Jets made legitimate attempts this offseason to hire someone who would essentially replace Hackett, not as a new offensive coordinator, but a title above that who would run the show. Sources spoke of many times last summer where Hackett called a play, then Rodgers changed it completely at the line of scrimmage. They figured that he can do the same thing come the regular season with somebody else running the show. That also follows the Athletics reports from Diana Rossini and Zach Rosenblatt from January, where again, similar sort of thing happened. Robert Saleh thought about adding another offensive staff member to, again, essentially just replace Nathaniel Hackett and get him to have a lesser role calling plays in the offense. Once Aaron Rodgers went down, I think we all saw it, how obviously the offense was going to look differently when you don't have Aaron Rodgers there, when you've been planning all offseason to have him as your starting quarterback. Things are going to look drastically different, but it is interesting now thinking back to that Mecole Hardman interview on the Pivot podcast where he went pretty much all in on the New York Jets and his time there, calling it, not unprofessional, but basically saying it was unprofessional, saying how the offense just really had no direction, no leadership once Aaron Rodgers went down, and people looked at him pretty crazy when he said that. You had Sauce Gardner coming out and responding for the New York Jets, but now with these recent reports about the team, Robert Saleh trying to look for avenues to essentially get somebody else in there to call plays, you look back on that and you think, maybe Mecole Hardman wasn't far off. Maybe in one world he was right about how the New York Jets sort of handled the offense with Nathaniel Hackett and really overestimating how much Aaron Rodgers could help solve some of their deficiencies on offense. Not to say that once you have Zach Wilson come in, Tim Boyle come in, Trevor Siemian come in as your starting quarterbacks. Not a lot of offensive coordinators can make those guys look like all pros right away, but a lot of people would say that just having these guys out there, a decent offensive coordinator could go in there and sort of change the game plan around these guys and try to maximize their skills, even though they know it's going to be worse than what they had in Aaron Rodgers, trying to change the play style, try to change the offense a little bit to sort of fit what they can do best. And I think that's really one of the biggest points to take from this is that there was just no shift in the offense. Once Aaron Rodgers went down, it seemed like there was no backup plan. There was no idea, no fathomable thought that Aaron Rodgers would ever get hurt and not be the quarterback. It seemed like they didn't plan for the worst case scenario where you don't want it to happen, but in case it does happen, you don't want to be left with your hands out wide and thinking, what do we do now? People are going to look to the offensive coordinator to have a backup plan to see how they adjust. That never came from Nathaniel Hackett, and I think that's just the biggest point to take from this, that Nathaniel Hackett might not be in a spot or wasn't in a spot back then to sort of lead this team in a different avenue without Aaron Rodgers. Without Aaron Rodgers, how good of a offensive coordinator can Nathaniel Hackett be with a Zach Wilson or maybe a Tyrod Taylor if he happens to play at all this year? How much will they look worse without Aaron Rodgers? Even though they upgraded a lot of spots on the offensive side of the ball, where last year they didn't, and that also played into their offense looking as bad as it did. If Aaron Rodgers isn't there, how different does this offense look with Nathaniel Hackett running the show? And also, thinking about this now, is he on the hot seat right now as an offensive coordinator? I think he probably should have been by the time he got here, or at least last offseason, because of that just period with the Denver Broncos. I think already there should have been some doubt with him being the offensive coordinator right away after that time in Denver. As much as, teams do it all the time. They bring in guys that are familiar with other free agent targets that they want to bring in. That's not really the issue. That's just a reality. It happens, but I think there does come a point where as much as you want to bring in that big name player to your team, bringing in this other guy, how much really validity is there in that, and how much can that other guy help your team? Nathaniel Hackett, from all the information that's provided in here, doesn't seem to provide as much, based on the reports saying that he called the play and then Aaron Rodgers essentially just changed it completely at the line of scrimmage. At that point, what is he contributing to the offense, to the game plan, if Aaron Rodgers is just changing it to whatever play he feels is best? But also in that same breath, Aaron Rodgers stood up pretty adamantly against Sean Payton in defense of Nathaniel Hackett. So there is that human friendship relationship there between Aaron Rodgers and Nathaniel Hackett. So how would he respond if the New York Jets halfway through the season got rid of him? He already is a little bit outspoken. I don't think that's breaking news to anybody. So how Aaron Rodgers sort of responds to that, maybe them getting rid of his friend, a familiar face in the organization. How does he respond, and how does that affect the team? The dynamic with Robert Saleh, is he then on the hot seat as well if they get rid of Nathaniel Hackett? There's a lot of sensitive points with this New York Jets team. It all seems great because they definitely upgraded. I was a fan of what they brought in, but there still remains those little pressure points with this team, with Nathaniel Hackett, Aaron Rodgers' health, Tyron Smith's health, how that all plays in. They're really going all in on this season, so it just seems to me from the outside looking in that any sort of crack, any sort of just wrong turn somewhere will affect the entire team, and it just seems like they don't really have that big of a margin of error to make this season if they want to end up where they expect to end up come January and December. But right now, that's where it stands. Is Nathaniel Hackett on the hot seat? I think he is. I think he should have been already. Does he make it through the entirety of this season? That will depend greatly on how the New York Jets perform, but that is all on that topic. We're going to take a quick break right now, and we're going to wrap up this show with one last topic. Kirk Cousins talking about the Atlanta Falcons drafting Michael Penix and how he responded to that action by his current team in the Atlanta Falcons. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to wrap up with the last segment. A pretty popular segment just throughout the whole offseason. The Atlanta Falcons and the Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix sort of saga. You know, Kirk Cousins being brought in for a lot of money. Then you draft Michael Penix with the 8th overall pick. Left a lot of people confused. Why wouldn't you instead draft a player that would add to Kirk Cousins and all that he could do for the Atlanta Falcons? But the Atlanta Falcons' new head coach, Raheem Morris, is pretty adamant about their decision to do it. The whole organization seems to be on the same page with Michael Penix and just reassuring that long-term success at the quarterback position. But Michael Penix has already talked about the situation and how his relationship is with Kirk Cousins, but now we finally have Kirk Cousins. What has he thought about the whole situation between the Atlanta Falcons, him and Michael Penix? On a recent episode of Bustin' with the Boys, they had Kirk Cousins on there, and they basically asked them, is there any beef between you and Michael Penix as of right now? Is there any awkward feelings right now? How is the waters right now in that whole relationship with him and the first round pick for the Atlanta Falcons? To which Kirk Cousins said, no, I don't think there can be. I don't think it's helpful. We're trying to win a Super Bowl and it's hard enough. So let's all be on the same page and let's go try to win the Super Bowl. Michael Penix basically said the same thing when they asked him about it at rookie minicamp, saying that he is just focused on going out there and performing, and that way he could maybe see some action if he just does his job and just performs as he should. Didn't really address any sort of awkward feelings with Kirk Cousins. According to Sports Illustrated, how this whole situation played out, one of the biggest reasons why Kirk Cousins left Minnesota was because they were pretty upfront with him and they mentioned them looking at drafting essentially his replacement, his successor in the draft. And it is just ironic that he signs with Atlanta and they do pretty much the same thing. How funny that all worked out in a sarcastic sort of way. But on that topic, on the idea of Kirk Cousins maybe knowing about what the Atlanta Falcons were planning, and would that have changed his sort of mentality around signing with the Falcons? Would he have considered some other spot if he knew the Falcons were planning on drafting Michael Penix in the first place? To which Kirk Cousins also said, I don't really deal in the hypotheticals. It just doesn't do us any good. And again, just basically keeping it pretty positive, saying that he wouldn't even think about that. But I think not saying anything about it says all that you need to know about it. I think there's no way anybody would have considered signing for the Falcons if they knew that they were planning on drafting a quarterback anyway. Now, the biggest caveat, obviously, is Kirk Cousins getting paid very, very well. So, if you paid me that much money, I would sit on the bench right away and give the starting job to Michael Penix, probably. If we're being really honest, the amount of money that Kirk Cousins got is crazy. To just sit on the bench, who has it better than that? Honestly, just talking about the money that he got. So, but he does feel that he just has something to prove, and I think this was a great opportunity to do that, which is why I was so confused and so I wouldn't say against drafting Michael Penix, but I was a big fan of him. I thought he could right away step in to lead a team, but he was prevented that opportunity because of who drafted him. He can't do anything about it. He's in the NFL. He accomplished his dream, but I just feel like we're being robbed of an opportunity to see Michael Penix right away if Kirk Cousins, as everybody expects, goes in there, has the success that they had because they signed him to so much money. You don't give that much money to someone you don't think can right away contribute to all the weapons they obviously have. So in saying that, Kirk Cousins also went into that interview talking of other points of emphasis around this whole situation and describing his mentality with the Atlanta Falcons drafting another quarterback. He basically went on to say that you can only control what you can control. You can't really worry about anything else, even your own organization, what they're planning on doing. This is the NFL, is what he said. Basically, anything can happen, and having that mindset would prepare him for something like this. He has the right attitude about it. It always seems like he's trying to prove himself, and I think that's the right mentality to have when you're faced with a situation like this. But the biggest point for me with what makes this all different, and ironically also for Kirk Cousins, this has happened before. He mentioned on Bussin' with the Boys that 3 years ago, his old offensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings, Clint Kubiak, called and told him that they were planning to draft his successor back then. So not foreign waters for Kirk Cousins in this situation, but my biggest thing with this, on top of feeling a certain type of way about not seeing Michael Penix right away be a starter, is that he got the warning before. The Vikings told him 3 years ago, and they told him this offseason, hey, we're planning on drafting a quarterback. So because of that, Kirk Cousins decides to not re-sign, decides to, 3 years ago, play even better than he did. The Vikings didn't draft anybody 3 years ago, but they at least gave him that warning. Every source that came out, every report that came out around the situation said that Kirk Cousins was pretty surprised and that there was no mention of this prior to draft night. So that's the difference there, not having that communication. How does that start off a relationship between a quarterback trying to do everything he can for this organization, but them not having, just the etiquette to let him know, hey, maybe we're thinking about drafting this guy at number 8. To blindside him like this, I think would be pretty, would make me feel pretty just upset about it, but Kirk Cousins took it very professionally and is just looking past it, trying to go out there and prove himself again. And how also I think it is important how Raheem Morris, a new head coach, also sort of maneuvers this situation with their quarterbacks, how important the quarterback position is, and how a new head coach, young head coach, handles that will be a massive pivot point on how this season really rolls out for the Atlanta Falcons. How early he brings in Michael Penix, how he maneuvers that whole situation, trying to adjust to a rookie coming in there and leading this already young team. If you go to Michael Penix, there's no way you can go back to Kirk Cousins, so you have to have that mindset in there, because if you bring in Michael Penix, then he doesn't play as well as you thought, and you take him out again, not only are you in this quarterback carousel within your own team, but you sort of really harm that confidence for a young player by pulling him if he's not playing as well as he should. So all that mixed into this whole situation that the Falcons got themselves into, now they really have to tread pretty carefully around the whole quarterback situation. I'm sure they want to hold off on deciding if they want to bring in Michael Penix or not. Ideally, that's how all of this plays out, but how, once you make that change and how they prepare for it, how they roll out this entire season and how successful that they are, will be a massive sign and big telling point on how they manage this with Raheem Morris, with how Kirk Cousins handles maybe being benched this season if he's not playing well because of the injury, and how Michael Penix does as well once he comes in. But Kirk Cousins seems pretty even-keeled about it. Same with Michael Penix. They're all going out there trying to prove themselves on the field. I think that's all they can do right now, but it is just you can't help but think it's not an awkward situation. I can't imagine what the tension is in that room, how the relationship is in that room with that. But, that will all play itself out the rest of the offseason. I'm sure they're a candidate for Hard Knocks. That would be very interesting to see. But for right now, for the Falcons and myself, that'll do it all for this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode, and to please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following us on all the other social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube Shorts that are posted every day. The whole recorded live shows are all on there as well, and individual segment videos. If you don't have time to watch an entire show, you can tune in to one specific segment video that is also on both channels as well. As a reminder, make sure to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more football conversations and NFL topics with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys, and also reminding you guys before I sign off, the official NFL entire schedule release is in just about half an hour, so make sure to tune into that. But also, again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I expect to see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.